Greetings, friends. Operational situation at the front on the 14th of March. Yesterday, we started the broadcast not quite typically, not with what I said about the operational situation, but about changing weather conditions. Why? Because it now has a very significant impact on the front, on the activity of hostilities on both sides, and naturally, it was expected that the enemy would undertake a number of assault actions in principle, along the entire front section. This is both the Kupiansk-Lemensky section of the front from it, and on the Zaporozhye, well, of course, Bakhmutskaya, Avdiivskaya. Accordingly, there are changes on the front. There are a lot of them, including the information remaining in the clarification. Well, now we will sort it all out. As for the Sinkovka-Kupiansky direction, there have not been any assault actions, positional fighting. But as for the Lebanese direction, they continue here today, and yesterday there were intensive assault actions by Russian troops in the western direction, in the direction of the settlement of Terny, but at the same time counterattacks by the AFU. By changes, it means that along the northern forest belt of the round beam, Russian troops managed to advance on a front section up to 400 meters wide, to a depth of 1 to 15 kilometers. At the same time, the APU launched counterattacks on one of the advanced positions. A few days ago, we added a red zone here, as you remember, based on footage from the APU drone, where it was signed that there was an advanced enemy position, that is, Russian troops. Well, in the area of the central part of the Yar Laptev, also managed to be thrown back to a depth of up to 250 meters. The situation was yesterday, the situation is today. In other words, our situation remains quite dynamic. At the same time, we have talked a lot in previous broadcasts about the fact that the Russian troops are making a very big bias to break through just the same along the northern forest belt of the Krugaev beam, reach approximately this area, and then begin the assault actions of the turns, that is, to transfer as much strength as possible, and of course, take more serious assault actions. From that moment on, the attack vector changed, including not only along the beam itself, and along the bottom. Along the lower forest belt, they tried to Yar Laptev, that is, there were a lot of moments, but in general, the main focus, as expected, will be on the round beam. There is a moment when we have intense fighting going on, because today, literally half an hour ago, there were reports that assault operations were underway again. Therefore, the results are, let's say, for clarification of course, because there are intense battles. First of all, this is precisely due to a decrease in the efficiency of aerial reconnaissance, but it was yesterday, as it will be today. We will already look at the fact, but in any case, the enemy is now putting a lot of emphasis on this, that is, as soon as weather conditions worsen, he has everything ready to launch assault operations. Therefore, we need to remember this. Now this will be the tactic on their part, especially observed, especially in the changing weather. According to the Bologorovka positional nature of the fighting, footage was published, but all this is within the red zone. In other words, we do not record any changes. As for the Bakhmut direction, here we will briefly walk along the Ivanova 1. So first of all, yesterday there was information that, again, activity is quite high north of Kleshivka, but not in the area of the railway near Kleshivka itself, but at the landing, which is north of the Kleshayevsky fortified area. Information came that there is activity of the Russian troops in this direction, but we do not record any changes in the result. The main emphasis is still placed on Ivanovo itself from the Russian side, where the situation remains quite dynamic. Our main focus now is on an attempt from the Russian side to move further to the village council building, that is, to enter approximately this area and gain a foothold. There are fights going on. There are also a number of attempts north of Ivanovskoye from the territory of the Popovsky Tract in the southwestern direction, but this is more of a positional nature of fighting with minimal activity. We are moving to the Avdiivka direction. In the Avdiivka direction. So, the first one is Berdik. If we observed absolute positionality in the previous days, and even in the morning summary, I reported that no significant changes were recorded. There were attempts, there were reports that Russian troops were attacking, so, well as it was before, along the southern forest belt. Along the southern road from Stepovoy, it was possible to repel the attack. Then later information came that a lot of attacks had already been made along the northern road. Also from Stepanov made a number of attempts to gain a foothold. The battles are approximately within the gray zone, not at the junction, but closer to the center of Berdik. And there are still shots, but this information remains for further clarification, where Russian armored vehicles reach approximately this area. But in general, the situation is for clarification. We will analyze this more in more detail in the evening, because the information here, taking into account the fact that assault operations are underway now, remains to be clarified. In other words, there are no specifics, because the APU managed to repel, but we see that the pressure from the Russian troops is not decreasing, but taking into account changes in weather conditions, it is on the contrary increasing. We have such a situation. This is the Berdik district. So, I'm already thinking about this in more detail. In the evening we'll talk. We turn to Orlovka. In Orlovka, Russian troops are also trying to move further westward, including along Yelikin Street. Somewhere it is even possible to push them, because before we had drone footage, where there was a blow to this particular knowledge of the advanced position, as reported from the Russian troops. There are a number of reports that they failed to gain a foothold. But whether it was not possible to gain a foothold specifically in this building or in this area, it is still being clarified. In any case, we have noted with you on the geopoint and on the binding of frames from drones. Therefore, so far, there have been no significant changes, taking into account the fact that there are ongoing rolls from the Russian side. Therefore, on clarification, as for the Thin and Garden Partnership Dawn without significant changes. Here just the same, we are now observing absolute positionality. The main fighting in our country takes place for the Garden Association and in the area of the northern farms, that is, approximately in this area. The main emphasis, of course, is being placed by the Russian troops now on breaking through, advancing along the central street, but we do not record any changes, including visually from drones, therefore, without any changes in this section. And as for Orlovka and Berdik, here I think in the evening, well, or within 24 hours, we will talk in more detail. May Day. Only yesterday we celebrated the advance on the basis of the same geopoint, where Russian troops were present. We drove by in an armored car. As you remember, we added a red zone, or rather the day before yesterday, from the day before yesterday to yesterday, so we added it. And naturally, further assault actions were carried out by the enemy, and he managed to do it more, I would say clarification. To break through further from those positions that we noted on previous broadcasts, here, in a section up to 1 kilometer wide, Russian troops advanced to a depth of 850 meters. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today. At the same time, we also made a very important remark, that there is activity from Vodien in the south direction, that is, between the Novoavdiivsky rate and the Staroavdiivsky rates, so there were reports in the direction from the gas station, that well, it was again the Russian Dug that showed activity. It was possible then to repel these attacks, and now, according to as the enemy naturally approaches along the Parashutraneva Street to the central part of Pervomaysky, there is naturally a transfer of forces along the water, in order to strike from two directions. That is, to carry out attacks in Pervomaysky, with as wide coverage as possible. It's a very difficult situation, I'll be blunt, very difficult. But do not forget that behind Pervomayskaya, we began fighting for its southeastern part in the second half of the 22nd year. Naturally, everything depended on the Avdiivka direction at that time. Well, in general, it is impossible to say yet that there is a rapid decline of the settlement. As far as possible, the APU counterattacks, of course, they build additional defensive lines, but not in Pervomaysky, but further, in order not to miss cases of a breakthrough of Russian troops further. As for Novelsky, as you have already understood, the information about his capture by the Russian troops has not been confirmed, but at the same time, the activity on the part of the enemy is quite high. Still east of Novelsky, there are more attacks going in the north direction, but what is further south, yes, they are making attempts, but it's all positional now. Nevertheless, I have said a lot, and I will repeat myself today. Don't forget that additional forces have been deployed. In other words, these forces were pulled up by Russian troops, fresh, and on a number of fortified areas that we have in the direction of Novelsky, and accordingly, they concentrated not just to disperse them, but in order to concentrate a more serious blow on Nevelsko. And there will definitely be an attempt to level the front line. Well, in general, we will look at the situation. Intense fighting continues now. We proceed further along the Kurikovsky direction of Georgievka. I will comment only on one point here, that we continue fighting along Zhavneva Street, on the northwestern outskirts of the Georgievsky Stavka, that is, the main emphasis is on approximately this area. There are a number, including our domestic ascenders, who mark this area under enemy control, based on the fact that there were shots where assault operations were carried out, which means Russian troops advancing with armored vehicles, through the very settlement of Georgievka. But further shots, whether they managed to gain a foothold, to catch on somewhere, were not published. Moreover, there are no reports from the Russian side that they have gained a foothold here. Therefore, the information remains for clarification, but in any case, the enemy conducts assault operations in this area, attacking, including in the area of fields within the gray zone, with the support of armored vehicles. In other words, a lot of maneuvers are now being performed in Georgiivka itself, and in the very, as for the victory, without significant changes. But as for Novomikhailovka, we have further, I would say probably clarification. Unfortunately, the enemy managed to gain a foothold then. But, we will start with you with the background, in order to make it more clear, because there are new viewers. So, a few days ago, Russian troops, about 4 days ago, carried out assault operations from a forest plantation in the western direction. An attempt was made between the fortified area and Novomikhailovka itself to advance to the section of the Novomikhailovka-Marengo road, and accordingly, the attack was reflected approximately in this area. Then, we added a part of the forest belt that remained in the red zone, because the Russian troops did not retreat to their original position, but stopped in the forest belt. But that was then. After that, we added a red zone 2 days ago, which means a small ledge, on the territory of farms that are located in the northern part of Novomikhailovka, north of the river. This means that the IFU has published footage of a strike, or rather a drone drop, on one of the positions of the advanced Russian troops, and accordingly, a small plot was added. But this is more of a clarification, because during that attack, he managed not only to gain a foothold in the forest belt, which is west of the forest plantation, but also in one, and at the same time a little wider control zone, in the area of what we have in the northern part of Novomikhailovka, north, over the river. Well, it means that according to the situation here, in a section up to 1.5 kilometers wide, we have advanced to a depth of 750 meters. This is the advance that we had about 4 days ago, but in any case, yes, the enemy, we state, had partial success here. They managed to repel the attack somewhere, but still do not forget that they have quite large forces concentrated on this sector of the front. I apologize. And he is making a lot of attempts to bypass the settlement in order not to carry out assault actions head-on. We have seen this, predicted among other things, that both north and south will be taken with the support of armored vehicles. However, I expected and expect that there will be more armored vehicles. That is, in Novomikhailovka itself. In Novomikhailovka itself, they are more, I would say now, of a positional nature. Fighting is going on, assault operations are being carried out, but these are small assault groups. So far, everything remains on positionality. At the same time, the main goal, as you can see, is to bypass from 2 directions, from the north and from the south, to Polovka itself, in order to interrupt logistics, that is, to the only supply road that we have along the main part. And of course, where the northern one is, it is already under partial fire control. The situation is a little more complicated here. Therefore, the fighting continues.